Hello, and welcome to the fourth webinar in our series Rethinking Manufacturing, which is brought to you by BDO Australia and the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, or AMGC. So my name is Ryan Pollett, and I'm BDO's National Manufacturing and Wholesale Leader. And if you missed our previous three webinars in this series, my team are adding links at the moment to the chat box for those recordings, so you're free to watch them at your leisure. So before we kick things off, I just want to quickly draw your attention to the housekeeping slide that's currently coming up on your screen. So to start, you'll note that you're all automatically muted. We do accept questions throughout the session, and you're welcome to submit those by typing them into the questions tab. We'll try and get through as many of those questions as we can. However, if we can't respond to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar concludes. In addition, we're going to be asking a couple of polling questions today, so please make sure you answer those as we go through. They'll pop up on your screen at the relevant time, and then we'll go through the answers to those. We're not using slides today for the content of the presentation. It's more of a Q&A type discussion between the speakers and the panel. However, there are a couple of slides that we've put together, and those are in the handouts tab for you to access as needed. If you do experience any technical difficulties, please click the support button, which is one of the bottom tabs on your screen. And finally, please note that this session is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a follow-up email containing the slides, a link to the recording, and access for future sessions with speaker contact details for all of us as well. So you'll get that through as an email after today. So today we're discussing a fascinating and a highly topical subject, which is manufacturing and the circular economy. The Australian manufacturing industry produces more waste than any other sector, and consumers are demanding businesses drive an environmental sustainability agenda. So what would the impact be if all Australian manufacturers embraced a circular economy? There's a number of fundamental reasons why the circular economy is important to our local and global futures, including the environmental impacts, strain on natural resources, and our growing landfill. More recently, the COVID-19 crisis has also highlighted gaps in our sovereign capabilities, and the circular economy could be the answer to improve our onshoring capabilities. However, while there are efforts to recycle, there's growing concern that this is not enough. We must reinvent waste to ensure the prospects of our futures, a future where waste presents an opportunity. So for Australian manufacturers, there's opportunity to lead the way and rethink their business models to be conducive to the circular economy. But how do they get started or improve what they're currently doing? And how can the concepts and innovations from academia be commercialized to create a zero waste future? So in this webinar, we're going to be discussing a manufacturer's role in this circular economy. And I'm very excited to have with me today an esteemed panel of experts for this discussion. So first up, welcome to Professor Veena Sahajwala, who's the Director of Sustainable Materials Research and Technology, known as SMART at UNSW, which is at the University of New South Wales. So welcome, Veena. Professor Veena Sahajwala is an internationally recognized materials scientist, engineer, and inventor, revolutionizing recycling science. She is renowned for pioneering a new generation of green materials and products made entirely or primarily from waste. Veena also heads the ARC Industrial Transformation Research Hub for Green Manufacturing, and in 2019 she was appointed inaugural director of the Circular Economy Innovation Network by the New South Wales Government through its Office of Chief Scientist and Engineer. Also joining us today is going to be Michael Sharpe, who's the National Director of Industry at the AMGC. So if you've watched our previous webinars, you'll be very familiar with Michael. For those who are new, Michael joined AMGC in 2017 and has a key role engaging with industry across Australia. This includes linking partnerships among the country's manufacturers and research facilities, which is vital for creating high-value jobs and products through collaborative projects. So now, unfortunately, as you can probably see, Michael's not currently with us. He's going to be joining us partway through the discussion today, which is why you can't see him on screen, but he will be with us shortly. And the third panel member today is Dylan Byrne. Welcome, Dylan. Dylan's a business services partner at BDO and also a returning panelist, so welcome back, Dylan. So Dylan has more than 20 years experience advising manufacturing and associated businesses, as well as providing strategic planning, growth planning, taxation and broad-based business advisory services. His clients have included specialty high-value manufacturers and agricultural supply chain businesses, with a particular focus on high-growth businesses. Planning for growth and future funding events, including exit planning, is of particular interest. Now, Dylan has a special interest in environmental sustainability issues and assists many companies with feasibility planning for renewable energy projects, including waste to energy projects. So welcome to the panel. Okay, so I think we'll try and get into a bit of a discussion now, if that's okay. And Veena, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right. And perhaps the first question is sort of a high-level one. Can you tell me why you believe we need to attach value to waste? So a simple question, but probably not a simple answer.
Yeah, no, Ryan, it's a very good question to kick off the discussion today, because I think, I mean, really, if we can start to think of our materials in our economy, and of course, waste is something that we will always have with us, and we will always generate it, whether we're industries or indeed from our homes. If we can actually start to recognize that there's a lot of embedded value in these materials, then naturally the minute value comes in, it has huge impact on our economy, because it means that it allows us to channel these materials in a way that we can do it in a very clever and a very smart way, design it so it's fit for purpose, and maximize the value that we can get out of these types of materials. So from purpose of any manufacturer or anyone who's dealing with waste and recycling, instead of just thinking of it as a burden, as an environmental burden, if you can actually find ways in which you can find manufacturers or people who can utilize it, you've naturally established or started to establish a supply chain around that material and developing value. So that's, I think, a very important way to think about it.
Now, you've inspired a concept that looks at redefining our thinking around the way we look at waste. So shifting away from end-of-life disposal to end-of-life revival, I think is the term that you've coined. Can you explain to us what you mean by that, and perhaps how you've seen that being put into action? If there's any relevant examples, that would be great.
Yeah, you know, I mean, often when we think about, you know, end of life disposal, we just sort of think, okay, well, if I can recycle my water bottle back into a new water bottle, that's great. I've done my bit. And of course, for most people, that's really an important part to know that there are ways in which my old water bottle can come back to life as a new water bottle. But what happens when you've got products? I mean, let me pick up another example that is, again, part of our everyday lives, our waste tires, right? We all use it in different forms. You can't have a car or a bus running without tires, right? So I think that's that all important basic product, and yet we know that these products will reach the end of their life, and therefore, if we start to imagine what could happen to these materials if we simply just see it as, you know, a burden on our society. Because we can't use it back as a tire again, then we're going to very quickly build up stockpiles of waste tires. But on the other hand, the reason why I wanted to think about revival and looking at going beyond recycling is exactly think about the tire example. You know, if you cannot recycle it and retread it and use it back again in that same format as a tire, does that mean that product is useless? Well, it's actually not useless, because yes, it may stop functioning as a tire, but indeed, it has got valuable molecules inside that tire. And these molecules are actually useful in that they can be utilized in some other way. And that's really the whole point about revival and thinking about reforming. So we talk about that fourth R around reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 Rs, and the fourth R being reform, because you can imagine now this tire and one of our technologies, which is green steel that utilizes waste tires in the process of making steel, can actually take those elements of carbon and hydrogen that are there in our tires and use that to reduce our dependency on coal-based materials that steelmakers need. So I think it's also a win-win outcome. It's fabulous from an environmental point of view if you can channel a lot of our waste tires into manufacturing. But also for a steelmaker, it's that whole sort of question of thinking, the topic of today being circular economy. You know, tires may not necessarily be a waste they generate, but they can actually use that tire in their production in a different way altogether. It's not about combusting it and releasing energy, but it's about using those molecules. So thinking about recycling and reforming right down at the molecular level is what we're talking about here. So from our perspective, green steel is an example of a technology that's running commercially, not just in Australia, but we've been privileged to actually export that IP to other parts of the world. So there are steel makers globally who are using green steel off the back of what UNSW has developed commercially.
Hmm. That's a great example, and I suppose you've touched on it there. Is there a market pull for some of these products that are being used where waste materials have been used and repurposed? You use the green steel example there. Is there any others that you've come across that you can sort of use to show how this can be brought through in a commercial way, and is the market demanding these types of materials be used?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to, if I can sort of, look at metals as the broad sort of family of materials, right? And I mean, and it's nice to be able to reflect on, because sometimes we do take it for granted that, oh, you can use scrap steel to make new steel and aluminium to make new aluminium and so on. But I think we've got to recognize that that happened as a result of really a lot of R&D that proves that when you want to recycle materials to manufacture new materials, and I want to use metals as a good example, because that just goes to show how important the role of market can be, to your point, Ryan, around market pull and creating supply chains to the point where we all understand that materials like steel are now bought and sold as a commodity globally. And the reason why we're successfully able to do that is because the technology that has been around for decades, which is electric arc furnace steel making technology, and we do have some of those examples in Australia. Indeed, our steel making partner in Newcastle, Molycop, has got an EF furnace there, and our partnership on green steel is an example with them. But I think, to me, the reason why I use that as an example is that it requires us to think in a way that all of these technologies are going to be born out of very important scientific endeavors, technological endeavors, and commercial endeavors. All of these have to come together, and the all-important question of market pull. Why would you not recycle your scrap steel and scrap aluminium? Because that, apart from recycling waste, there's the all-important question that I think so often we don't talk about, which is, by recycling materials, we're actually reducing our carbon footprint. So the fact that we're using, recycled metals like steel and aluminium, and of course a whole range of examples in our economy, and making new metals from scrap metals also is a way to reduce our carbon footprint. Not to mention, of course, everything you've touched upon in your introduction there around really valuing our resources, and really questioning that if we can reduce our carbon footprint, if we can achieve those goals towards a low carbon economy, and do it in a way where Australia can show leadership. And I think that's the other important point, that, for everything, there doesn't appear to be a textbook solution. Yes, for metals, we do have that. But I think when we are talking about the more complicated materials, we're talking about plastics, and we're talking about tires, we need to ask that question: can us as a country take that leadership role in supporting new manufacturing technologies to come to life? And this is where, of course, it's a really exciting future that we're sitting at the cusp of what all of this means to the global economy.
100%. And I suppose on the other side, I think there's also a need to be aware of what compliance risks and emission risks might be out there for businesses considering getting involved in recycling. Where can they get advice around that and make sure they're on top of those risks?
Yeah, and I'd say, again, Ryan, it's a very important thing to think about, which is going right back to that R&D question, right? I mean, we can't just assume that you've got sort of tires and plastics. I'll use our green steel example, right? I mean, you have to, the research that was funded there through the Australian Research Council, so ARC funded that scientific research. And I think, to me, that's an important question again, all to your point about, we've got to address concerns around emissions, quality of material we're making, fit for purpose, manufactured products, and performance of the finished products. Again, it's got to be fit for purpose. You can't just say, well, here's a piece of plastic or metal, just go use it. You need to understand and look at it from the context of a manufacturer. To your point, people like us, researchers, people who develop technologies and commercialize technologies, have to put ourselves in the shoes of the end user. And I think, to me, that's that all important question. When you can imagine, how complicated the world of an end user can be, not only they've got to make money, they've got to comply with regulations, they've got to make products that are fit for purpose. I think in all of these cases, it has got to be a collaborative solution. You don't have to have all the answers yourself. It may well be that the R&D partner, in our case, we've got our industry partners who we provide that R&D support to. The steelmaking company in Newcastle, I mentioned their name. We've got an e-waste recycler, Tesam in Sydney. All of these are examples of companies who want to do all the things we're talking about, right? Understanding manufacturing, looking at possibilities of circular economy. But they've also got that recognition. They don't necessarily have all the answers, and nor should anyone be expected to have all the answers. So to all these questions means that you've got to be able to ask the right questions, develop collaborations with researchers, with university partners. And I think that's important, because in the process of doing that, you may well learn a whole lot of new things that you may simply not be aware of. So it's also around saying it's opening up the realm of possibilities. I mean, our plastics example is a classic one. Our industry partner, who's got e-waste plastics, is one of those cases where people would have looked at it and said, oh, well, it's too hard to recycle, can't be recycled. In fact, we've shown now through this partnership that we can not only recycle it, but do it in a form that's really a high value plastic filament fit for 3D printing. So, there are things that you discover and learn through exciting collaborations.
Yeah, and you brought up there the e-waste microfactory, I think that
Yes.
I did want to talk to you a bit about, because that's fascinating. And yeah, that I understand you launched the world's first e-waste microfactory in 2019. You launched a plastics microfactory, which is a recycling technology breakthrough at the time. And you're now producing a new generation of green materials and products that are made primarily from waste. So, many times the missing link for those innovative ideas is the link between, academia and what's been happening there, and the commercialization that you just touched on. And I think, with that example, you're looking to overcome that, and you're succeeding in what you're doing. And I suppose really fascinated to hear a bit more about that e-waste microfactory and your plans to sort of take that forward and perhaps export the model around the globe. Can you talk about that a bit more, Veena?
Yeah, Ryan, you really touched upon something that, again, you could sort of arguably say that, the Smart Center, if I had to pick two examples, I've touched upon green steel because that's the oldest one that has come out of the Smart Center and we've commercialized. But I think in a way, this one is a good example of a technology that is relatively young. You could say it's kind of taking its baby steps and just starting to walk. And so it's a nice sort of analogy where you're in that journey and you're looking at how challenging it can be when you think about commercialization. And so I've got to again give credit to our industry partners who supported that journey, but also equally importantly, the Australian Research Council I mentioned earlier around supporting this kind of collaborative effort in Australia. I think it's really a model that we should celebrate. We do have to recognize that partnership and collaboration through the ARC. There are various models in which you can have, I guess, government funding, but you do need industry partners who are on that journey with you. And that microfactory, you're absolutely right. We launched that at UNSW a couple of years ago. And I think to us, that important part of that journey has been, by the time we were ready to launch it, we actually had our industry partners who had been working with us. So in fact, we took an approach that was kind of the opposite, as in we'd been working on it for a long time. And the launch was really, in a way, a nice way for us to kind of celebrate that milestone that said, not only have we done the R&D, but, having a pilot facility at UNSW and running that at UNSW is also an example of how universities through that partnership and that journey with our industry partners can go a long way in developing commercial opportunities for our industry partners. And so we've had so many industries who are in the business of taking e-waste, and our partner Tesam, the example I gave earlier, who's a member of this hub, when they came to us about plastics that come from e-waste, you think about all the bulky printers that we all have in our homes and in our offices. And when you sort of, find out that your printer is now no longer working or it's obsolete, how many of us get so frustrated because the last thing you want to do is throw it away. Now, imagine if there was a solution that actually said that you could take those waste plastics, convert them into plastic filaments, and demonstrate that those plastic filaments in a microfactory could produce these high quality products. And that could then become a feedstock for 3D printing. And imagine if you could do that all in a small space of about 100 square meters, right? So I make that point about a microfactory because often people do ask, well, how micro is it? So I guess it's just important in that context. Think about a warehouse, and think of people who might have the ability to process these types of waste plastic bearing electronic devices, and plastics is a part of our electronic system. I mean, many of us, I know in my home, I've got right downstairs an old modem sitting there because we just got NBN, at home. And I think that's another classic example. You've got all these different sort of devices that you don't stop to think. You go, okay, so that's plastic. And yes, there's got some metal in it because there's some circuit board inside. And so for us, that journey was about saying that plastic is also a valuable material. And if we can indeed convert those, as we have now shown in our microfactory, and if we can indeed show that it doesn't stop there, it can actually then be fit for purpose. So, people who want us to try 3D printing all kinds of complex products, we've done that successfully. So it's really quite nice when people come to us with saying, oh, well, I've got a one-off of this. This is the only one. Please be careful. And then the next minute, we've managed to print many, many more than one. I think we've achieved tens and hundreds of these products for people. So I think it's also that value creation. So that for a business, you can suddenly go from going, you know what, I don't have to be the manufacturer, but I can be a consumer, I can be an end user. But that commitment towards circular economy means everybody wins. So that win-win outcome is if you're part of that supply chain, you might be a waste recycler who's got waste plastics, or you might be someone who is producing plastic filaments, or indeed an end user. There is something to be said when really the wins are shared across the economy. And I think to me, that's the ultimate icing on the cake, when I'd love to be able to see a future where, using resources that we have in our economy, everybody wins out of that development.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Veena. And yeah, I think there's probably a good point to bring in an audience question that we had, and I'll try and bring you in on this one, Dylan, as well. So I guess this is sort of talking to some of the manufacturers out there that are watching this. One of the questions we had was, what are the easiest ways that a company can get started with circular manufacturing? Veena, did you want to sort of give any practical tips that companies might want to take on board?
Yeah, very good question from the audience, Ryan. I think to me, I love the fact that people are already starting to think circular manufacturing, right? So if you can imagine that either you are generating waste, which of course a lot of people know that they've got a tip outside their factory and they're throwing away some materials, and they're sort of thinking, well, I really don't want to throw this, but how can I obviously do something meaningful with it? I think one simple way we've found with so many producers and indeed manufacturers is to help join those dots. And so if you've got a useful material, start to look at where local manufacturers could be, for example, in your state or in the country, where you can actually channel those into manufacturing and creating manufactured products. So one is what you do with your waste, and look out for opportunities where you might be able to help somebody else, because I think it works both ways. If you can actually help somebody else, don't forget there is a good reason why you would also do that, apart from being altruistic, but you don't have to then pay for disposal into landfill, right? Because landfill disposal of waste is not free. There are levies attached to that. The other side of it is, if you are thinking about, as a manufacturer, you want to source raw materials, think of where you can source raw materials from recycled content. So again, it could be metallic, it could be plastic, it could be glass. Think about how you might be able to go about sourcing materials from waste resources that might be available literally down the road. I think when we were in Cootamundra once, we realized one of our microfactory operators out there, as we had sort of finished chatting with them and we sort of were driving down the road from him, we were going, oh, there's a guy who's got automotive waste glass someone who's repairing and has probably got a stockpile, window glass and all of the things that we all are so familiar with. So, I mean, that's just that example. You never know. Someone down the road might have a resource that you're looking for.
Great point. I mean, Dylan, did you want to add anything to that from your experience?
Yeah, look, I just think that point that Veena made about connecting buyers and sellers is really, really important. I suspect it's either very, very specialized or very ad hoc. It'd be great to see if we could get to the point where we do have platforms that can, create some of those linkages for efficient, transactions. The one that comes to mind, and I see more and more often, is manufacturers saying, well, how do we create more security around our supply chain? And one of the key points there is energy. So, from 5 or 10 years ago, someone would be a bit novel to have an idea of taking X feedstock, putting it through a process, creating 3 products, energy being one of them, to, in more recent times, seeing people looking at their own waste and saying, well, how do I keep this on site? A true circular economy. It's not even leaving the boundary of the facility, right? And bringing in technology, which is becoming much more affordable. But then saying, well, I don't need all this energy, all these byproducts. Who could I share it with? Who am I located nearby? And you're seeing more and more of these hubs starting to come together where people are collaborating, and that's really great to see. And the only other one that came to mind was, a lot of people think that, take glass as an example. A lot of people think that all the glass that we put into the recycling centres is recycled straight away, but that's not the case, right? But there are businesses out there who have figured out how to turn glass into 5 different grades of sand, if you like, and it's been used in roads or 3D printing and all sorts of things. So, I think those kind of businesses will become more and more successful, but there's still a few dots to be joined, I think, in terms of buyers and sellers.
Yeah, that supply chain question, Dylan, is absolutely spot on, because I mean, to give you that example that I mentioned briefly at Kuramandra, our industry partner there, I mean, of course, from his point of view, the fact that one of the microfactories that he's putting there, it is in fact on glass and textile products that we're making are green ceramics with that partnership with him. But I can only imagine that there's no reason why he couldn't be growing his business, right? If there was enough demand for products. So you can imagine the first year might be about, yep, let's get our teeth stuck into it. Let's learn how to do it, and all of those things that you have to do in any manufacturing system as you're commissioning new systems. But I think once you are confident in your ability to operate these types of systems, then microfactories allow you to, because it's modular, you can bring on another module and you can go, look, there's no reason why I can't take materials from the area I live in, but beyond, and that sort of zone, few hundred kilometers. You don't have to necessarily think that I've got to go all out and too far away to do that. I mean, he's pretty close to Canberra, for example. So, I mean, he could be looking at accessing some of the materials there. And indeed, while I'm using that example, I remember one of our other industry partners who's out in Adelaide, Spark Furniture, fantastic producer of furniture. But the fact that he's taken our waste glass and textile, tiles and panels and produce these beautiful products that I don't want to take Cameron's thunder away, but I'm sure at another time he'll be happy to share with you about how, the ability to not just see it as manufactured goods, but to actually start to bring more and more of those design elements into it. So you can create products that look pretty incredible. So I think, to me, that was the other element, the reason why I want to talk about Spark's case in point, that yes, all of these things we talk about with green ceramics in our case, the reason why we've combined that with glass and fabric and really textile waste textile is it gives it such a unique look that we've had designers and furniture producers who absolutely love it. And it gives this furniture manufacturer really something unique. And from what I understand, he's been, putting these products out there in Canberra. And I think, to me, that's an example of where you have something unique to offer as as a manufacturer, as a producer, you don't just stop at the point where you see yourself as, hey, I've done this nice product and I hope someone loves it. But rather actually talk about the merits, both around circular economy, because clearly that's what, waste transformation is all about. But I think also showing the point that it's not just creating this, product that, someone might buy it because it's a green material or a green product. But I think to me, the important message there is that it has to, one, be engineered. So that's the critical element. Let's not forget quality and engineered product. Those are the essential elements, because it's got to perform well. That's the whole point of manufacturing an engineered product. But I think the other element in this case, as has become evident even to us as we've interacted with people who are in the world of industrial design and so on, is how much people love it, because of the fact that some of these products have quite unique looks and colors and features. So in fact, there can be positive elements to producing something like that we may not have even thought about.
That's great. Thank you. And Dylan, I might stay with you now, and just continuing on the theme of what advice might be helpful for some of the manufacturers who are watching this, and coming at it from a different angle, which is the area that you help your clients with. Can you tell me a bit about the work that you do helping your clients to adopt sustainable business models and the issues that may arise that you help them through, I suppose, including any sort of financial impacts that you come across, or any other similar risks?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it in recent times has come down to just the supply chain and the security of it. Now, unfortunately, we can't get all of our raw materials through the circular economy, but it's increasing. I think the thing that I love about what I do is we're quite often just asking people to stop and think about, what am I missing here? What have I been doing for the last 5, 10, 20 years that I don't even know exists out there, and just challenging those preconceptions, and just having a new view of, okay, well, my business is a bit wider than I thought it was, and maybe it's a bit deeper, and maybe there's some complementary things going on there. What I have been seeing too, though, is it's going from people who came to me with ideas and want to talk about the feasibility of it were initially quite sustainable from a philosophical, if you like, perspective. They had great ideas and great reasons for doing it, but it quite often didn't stack up financially, because we couldn't get a feedstock securely, and we didn't have good offtake for our products, those types of things. But I think it's much more commonplace now for people to just, it's good business. As Veena said earlier, the products that we're looking at using have to stack up from a technical and an economical perspective. We're not doing things just because of the feel-good factor, but I think a lot of those things are starting to come together in terms of people's willingness to do things a bit differently. Yeah. Yep. So I guess it's a bit of a combination of risk management, but seeing the potential in a different light, and you bring those two together, and there's a little bit more impetus there, I think.
And do you see that businesses that you're working with who are proactively addressing and incorporating sustainability and energy management principles, etc., into their strategic plans and goals, those are more successful in your experience? Are you seeing some success stories there?
Look, I am seeing some success stories. I think it's also fair to say that there's quite often there's a bit of a lag between trying something new and that it won't be instantaneously successful. But I do think that people are definitely seeing the medium-term side of things, and they're looking out that far in terms of making decisions for the future. But having said that, some of these businesses are successful now. We don't need the world to change a whole lot for our model to all of a sudden become profitable or successful from a commercial perspective. So I guess to an extent it depends on the industry, the risks around the supply chain, the need for energy, and sometimes you do need to find yourself in a bit of a Goldilocks space where you've got things lining up for you. But but that's becoming more and more common, I think.
I think it's I mean, that's a really good point, Dylan, because I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, I mean, there are changes in regulations that are coming from next year, as people or your audience may know, but just for those who don't, there is policy at the federal level that has put 4 items on an export ban list. So we've got 4 items, that's tires, plastics, glass, and paper. So, I mean, if I sort of use even those examples, so we're not going to be able to export those waste materials and those waste products. So you can imagine, I mean, if we use that as an opportunity and say, well, to the tires example or the plastics or glass examples, I mean, if for a lot of people where export was the only way out, that door is going to shut from next year, right? So I think to me, the economics will stack up over time, because I think it's going to mean that, well, you can't just put things away into landfill, because that's going to cost you money as well. So you're better off building partnerships and looking at, how you might be able to create a viable supply chain for different types of materials. So, I mean, that example of that business in Cootamundra, interestingly, I think when I first met Andrew all those years ago, yeah, I mean, the business was collecting, if I remember correctly, tires and mattresses, and I just sort of found that really fascinating. It's like, okay, well, you've got these 2 products. I mean, clearly, again, everyone's got it in our homes. So clearly it's an important part of the business, but it kind of comes back to the point we've been talking about. There's going to be lots of good reasons to think what it could mean, one, from an export ban point of view. But I think also the other important point we've talked about, which is the whole sort of supply chain being affected. I mean, we know whether it's about manufacturing goods like PPE or indeed industrial materials. There are many, many industrial materials that are needed in our economy. If people were reliant on imports, well, we've got to stop and prepare ourselves and think about what future supply chains and any business to de-risk accessing materials and products. You've got to really prepare yourself for what the future might look like. And if we're going to start to see more and more sort of hits on our supply chains, then starting to think about what it could mean in terms of onshoring, manufacturing. And again, you don't have to do that yourself. I mean, it may well be sometimes that it's building that partnership, for critical materials that you might find strategic suppliers and buyers. And I think it probably goes back to your point, Dylan, that I think it can't just be an ad hoc sort of thing. Maybe we all need to start to think about where strategically we might want to position ourselves, and lots and lots of new opportunities where, manufacturing precincts are coming up. We've heard about Western Sydney, kind of setting that up with the Aerotropolis as an example. So if there are opportunities coming up where imagining what that circular manufacturing could look like, sourcing our materials from within that region could well be an example of how you can proactively go out there and source your suppliers and position yourself strategically. Just thinking about where you might be in the next few years might be worth kind of contemplating all of that now in light of what the world is facing with COVID. You never know, you might deliver, a whole new economic sort of outcome for your company, create jobs, and create really all of those important outcomes for our economy that we know is so desperately needed.
Yeah, completely agree, Veena. And I think I'm sure when Michael joins us, he'll touch on this as well. But I know that AMGC believes passionately in that, and I think in terms of what we're talking about around creating links and assisting with collaboration between manufacturers and research institutions, etc. The AMGC is very proactive in that, and their database of manufacturers, as you well know, Veena, is extensive, and I'm sure they've been able to help already in this regard. And yeah, we'll certainly get Michael to touch on that more when he comes online.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say while we're waiting for Michael to join us, but certainly Michael's been an absolute inspiration. It really only takes a few opportunities where I've traveled with him and really more like kind of keeping pace with him, as he's sort of running around the country. I think it's more like it. I'm trying to run behind and trying to make sure that I get to see all the different manufacturers and people who who are really so excited about, the topic of conversation today. It just goes to show that really it's about so many different opportunities that I think AMGC has really spotted for us. I mean, I think that example of Cameron in Adelaide, I think I was giving that example earlier with Spark Furniture. I just happened to meet Cameron at one of these AMGC invitations where he was just somebody happened to be sitting next to me over dinner. And so, I mean, this is all that point about sometimes, I think AMGC does so much more than what they probably even realize themselves in terms of, being able to literally, in this case, spark off the conversation. There you go. There's Michael.
Oh, here he is.
Michael,
your ears must be burning. Yeah.
Exactly, Michael. So I'm going to stop it at that and let Michael tell his own story about how he kind of drives all of these partnerships and collaborations that we've been so privileged to be a part of. I was saying, Michael, I have to run behind you to keep up with the pace that you work at.
Yeah, no, it's good to see you all. And as Ryan knows, usually at these summits, I've been in the car. So this time I'm at home, which is good for a change. But tomorrow I'll be down in Wagga Wagga. So just lining up some meetings with our members down there and talk to local manufacturing in that region. So yeah, manufacturing is quite a time at the moment, that's for sure. But good to see you, Veena.
Good to see you too. Good to see you too, Michael.
Thanks for joining us, Michael. And yeah, your ears might have been burning as you came online there, as Veena was just, giving you a great rap there around, the great work that AMGC's been doing in connecting manufacturers and in terms of, many areas as we previously touched on in the past webinars, but particularly around this circular economy issue. I suppose in terms of your role and what AMGC are doing, can you maybe give us a bit more color around how you've been doing that? Maybe some examples of businesses you've seen that have been success stories in this area. Would that be all right?
Oh, sure, yeah. Thanks, Ryan. I mean, it's always great to get out on the factory floor and particularly out in the regions to see manufacturing on the move and the innovation that's happening right now. But here we are talking about the circular economy. So we've got several members that have been innovative before this crisis and looking for new export markets and using waste as a resource to put into their manufacturing value chains. So that's been good. I guess maybe a couple of examples. We've got Dresden Vision, who are using recycled plastics to make prescription eyewear. So here's an example of using waste plastics from various sources. Maybe I'm sure Veena can touch on some of that, but yeah, using waste plastics to make high valued products in prescription eyewear that are selling through their stores across Sydney. They've got stores opening up around Australia and also in Canada, New Zealand as well. So the company is expanding even during this crisis through using waste as a resource to create new values. This is just one example of the manufacturing that we're seeing out on the field. But this is where AMGC research has shown that we need to get universities and industry working together. We really need this collaboration effort to bring new technologies into the manufacturing sector. We don't just say that it's a manufacturing sector anymore either. It's really a capability. Our nation's capability. What are we capable of making? What can we produce and export to the world to create the high valued products and the high skilled jobs for today and for tomorrow?
That's great. And Michael, how are AMGC helping some of these manufacturers in adapting to the circular economy? Is there any other things that you're doing, to assist some of these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, just our research, of course, we've been co-funding some of these projects to assist those companies to grow. I guess put our AMGC research into action. We need many, many more Australian firms looking to export, and so the technology plays a part in that. And of course, the supply chains, you've got to have that economic value position to start with if you want to compete globally. And so waste streams can certainly play a key part in that. The export opportunities are only growing around the world. I mean, as Australians, we're trusted wherever we go and people love Aussies, but they also like Australian products. And so, the famous ones, of course, are ResMed and Cochlear with their world-class products. But they started out as a startup company too in Australia, now operating on a global stage. So how can we create the technologies and build those global companies to really boost Australian jobs? I can tell you too,
Thanks.
Ryan, the latest one is around the Recycling Modernisation Fund. So the Australian government has announced. Okay, good one. Yeah, well, it's $190 million from the Australian government, which will be matched around Australia. It'll probably end up being around $1 billion project for the circular economy. And so, you know, some of this research and technology that's coming together right now, it's quite exciting because you're talking, you know, everything from food production to space. You know, the Australian Space Agency and the technology that's being developed there for the NASA Moon to Mars mission. You know, you need things that can be lightweighted, and new technology can play a key role in that. So, you know, it's nothing, we shouldn't waste a crisis. And I can tell you very much so that from the manufacturing side of things, our great manufacturing firms are doing the very best they can to be agile right now and looking for new opportunities. So not just in their traditional space, but looking at adjacent markets where they can operate perhaps in the defence sector or in the space industries that are emerging right now. Who would have thought? But you know, NASA Moon to Mars, it sounds like a good book, but it's real. We are now a signatory to this mission, and Australian firms that I'm dealing with even today are being part of that and signing up to work on that mission. It's quite exciting.
Very exciting. Yeah, completely agree. And it's certainly been in the media a lot, and great to see that we're at the forefront of that. And yeah, you touched on there the Recycling Modernisation Fund. As I mentioned, I was going to ask you about that. Is anything else you want to say around how some of the people listening, you know, if they're interested in that, how they might want to get involved in that fund, and you know, how they might look to access some of those funds?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of information on the Australian government's website, business.gov.au. There's always the updates on the AMGC website. So anyone out there should join the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. It's absolutely free. We're creating this new ecosystem right across the nation to bring manufacturers together and share resources, share experience. We've got companies working together that never knew each other before, and yet by coming together, they're proving that they can access new markets, share opportunities around, hey, I've done this before, I reckon you could have a go, and I'm happy to help you. So it doesn't have to be too difficult. Practical ways are often the best ways. And so as Veena knows, I'm very happy to make those connections and bring people together to create these new opportunities. And it is happening right now.
That's perfect.
I totally
and I
agree
suppose,
with and I was going to say I totally agree with Michael. I think what we are finding, you know, every time, certainly, you know, Michael's sort of been the driver in bringing different sort of players together, people I would not have ever met if it weren't for the introductions happening through AMGC. So I think, to me, even in these times where we're not sort of physically able to travel and meet people face to face, I think that hasn't slowed anything down. In fact, if anything, for us, you know, some of the benefits out of this ability to utilize what we're doing at UNSW and working with our industry partners is, even if it is the early days and planting seeds and new ideas and prototyping products, all of those are important things, because I think, you know, when people sort of get that opportunity to think, and I think, to me, that important part of that overall thinking is, and, you know, I know it's a cliche, but, you know, you have to start to put hope into something where you might be able to see that this is an opportunity to, yes, do good for our environment, but also equally do good for our economy and job creation and all of those things. And I think, to me, that's been very inspiring, you know, where we've had companies and you know, again, some of the ones that Michael's been introducing us to, you know, people do talk about that yes, it's going to be good for our business in the long term, and we have that conversation. What does it mean accessing recycled materials, all the things we've talked about before? But I think the fact that in the conversation we also never lose sight of the fact that this is an opportunity to actually create win-win outcomes. If it means that it's going to help us deliver better outcomes for our environment, better outcomes in terms of leading the world with a lot of this R&D. We are world leaders. I mean, we talk about these types of new scientific endeavors. You know, our ARC hub, for example, that's funded on micro recycling of batteries. You know, that example I was alluding to earlier. I mean, these are examples where, you know, it's not like there's some other textbook solution somewhere else and we just have to go and find it. You know, people are struggling with the same question globally. So I think, again, it's one of those things where if we are thinking about what this could mean for future of any country that's really wanting to jump on it sooner rather than later, there's no denying that we're going to be looking at how we're going to store our energy, how we're going to make renewable energy more and more affordable and energy storage affordable, and our manufacturers benefiting from that whole sort of new economy around renewable energy, we should be talking about then renewable materials, because without these renewable materials, we actually don't have capacity to make these products. So I think, to me, it's also part of that more holistic thinking that we can start to say that if there are all of these materials already in our economy, whether they come from our electronics or indeed plastics and glass and all the things we've talked about, enabling more and more decentralization of that capacity to manufacture high value goods means you are actually planting seeds across the country. So I think, to me, that's an important message, that it's got to be not just thinking that it's just for the big companies, in big metro areas to do it, but rather I would say many of the niche producers, manufacturers in regional areas can really pick up on opportunities that they may have previously thought was beyond reach because, they couldn't afford to set up, some of the manufacturing, capacity. But what we're really saying is actually it's possible because we're creating high value materials. So high value materials, if you produce those in smaller volumes, as long as there's a market pull for it and a market demand, you can actually be looking at exporting some of these materials. So why not kind of go from thinking that, I just have to meet the demands of local, end users? Yes, that is certainly one opportunity in your local regions, but also think that if I could be, setting myself up to creating materials that has got an export value as well, I think can be a fabulous way to think about, that example of plastic filaments that I was referring to earlier. Australia imports plastic filaments right now, right? So why can't we start to make our own, enough for our own needs, but also look at exporting these types of high value materials? Because let's face it, people across the world are doing 3D printing. That's not new. But what we're really saying is that this feedstock, which is required, is going to be important. So it's that value and questioning, can you produce something of high quality at a competitive price, and is it sustainable as a material, as a product? Because that becomes a unique feature of what you can offer. And I don't know if you've got a moment. Sorry, Michael, go on.
I was going to say, you're quite right, Veena, and as you and I both know, a lot of this was happening before the crisis. Companies were looking at new ways of doing things in their business with robotics and automation, but you've got companies that are doing great things, developing intellectual property, and another company that comes to mind is Crawford Boots, so based in regional New South Wales and doing great things. Maybe we can put up their website as well. But Crawford Boots, developed patented technology for making boots. Who would have thought? And yet this is Australian ingenuity and with an ability to export to the world. So the thing with having professors like Veena and using technology is a great driver for manufacturing, because the ability to form collaborative partnerships and connect research with industry will be a key driver for our economic recovery. I know that Veena, you've probably touched on some of the e-waste recycling, but some of Veena's technologies, I now know that it takes 6,000 mobile telephones to create just 1 tonne of e-waste. And out of that 1 tonne of electronic waste, 6,000 mobile phones, Veena is able to extract 300 grams of gold. And so I said, well, you need to call this a gold making machine. That's the way to market it. But the ability for these regional manufacturers to take time out of their business and come to Veena's facility at the university and ask questions and engage in the research, this will be one of the key drivers to accelerating Australia's manufacturing opportunity.
Thank you. And I just want to quickly touch on one audience question that's come through, and it's a good one, I think, and probably more for Veena and Michael, and Dylan, feel free to add anything. But yeah, the question is some very exciting examples of new purposing of materials. So they're commenting, on some of those that you've already mentioned. But question is, can you tell us about any other examples of where manufacturers are rethinking their manufacturing processes, perhaps being more modular in the design of their products? Is that something that you've seen, Veena or Michael, in your travels?
Well, we've just launched the prefabrication research that we've done for the Australian government. So anyone can access our website and download the prefabrication research that we've just published. and we're looking at all we can do now in modularizing the construction sector. So there's a broad opportunity there, and I know the circular economy will play a key part in that as well for construction goods and across a wide range of building and construction for sure. So there is this opportunity that wasn't necessarily there before, and creating these new growth opportunities for business here in Australia, for companies big and small. This is where it is, and the collaboration will, again, that's going to be the key driver.
Veena, anything to add?
I was going to say I totally agree with Michael. I mean, I think what we've seen again in, another example came to mind in the regions when I was actually traveling through Armidale, and I think Michael, maybe it was with you. In fact, I think it was with you when we hosted an event one evening back in the days when we could, about a year or so ago. And I just remember distinctly that small business owner, Rob, who has a business, New England Solar. And I think for him, it was really a question of approaching us to talk about the fact that, look, yes, I might be in the business of installation of solar panels, but I'm also equally concerned about what's happening with all the waste solar panels that are going to become an important part of our economy. I mean, we are pulling a lot of these offline now as they are reaching the end of life. So, or indeed, if some do get damaged for whatever reason. But I think the fact that this is coming from somebody in the business, and in fact, I think it was only last week where I had a meeting with Rob where he still hasn't given up. And the reason why I wanted to use that as an example of modularity is important, because for him, what he's basically saying is that, and can you help us designing that first module? You don't have to solve the entire value chain in the first instance, right? Thinking modular means that it allows you to go one step at a time. So the first step might be, look, okay, I know there's good quality aluminium, there's obviously silicon and silver and glass and all of these materials in it. How do I get to each of these different materials in there? And in his mind, it was the fact that as someone who knows how to design and build machinery and equipment, which I think was fantastic. I mean, this is how these conversations happen, right? Where I might throw a few ideas and someone goes, oh, I can make that. Like, that's great. Now let's get on with it, because I think sometimes the answer is not there, as we were saying before, in a textbook. You can't exactly go, oh, where can I buy that machine from? So I think, to me, the other element in this I'd like to throw in when we talk about modularity, why can't we also think about the fact that our own ability as a country, with talented people, that capability is also around designing and building machines. And that's really what inspired us with our microfactories. It was this thing that there was some of these machines that were just not there off the shelf. So the fact that we've got now someone in the New England region, whereas we know is going to have a whole lot more solar coming in, is now pushing us to help him with recycling solar panels. I think, to me, it's such a great story, because he can be the champion. He can be the guy who knows how to work in that region. We can provide, as Michael was saying, that engineering and design and R&D support. And I think, to me, it's that classic example of that partnership. But we do need to think modular. We don't have to think everything has to be a giant machine. And for us, part of that excitement comes in working and designing some of these techniques. So in addition to the micro recycling science that we're doing, we're also thinking about how do we design techniques, and our ability to couple that with making machines that can do all of these things is part of the fun. We've got engineers, amazing engineers and scientists who do this fabulous work. And Michael will remember our mechatronic engineer Anirban, who loves playing around with these, and Keith, who's probably somewhere online listening in. But I think, to me, these are all important stories of the fact that that's how we all get inspired by people who want to make it happen. And I think, to me, they're the biggest source of inspiration for people like us. They're pushing us hard and fast, which is great.
I just think that as a country, we've been so good at digging stuff out of the ground for so long and just exporting it offshore, whether it's coal or iron ore or whatever it is. Whereas now we have this opportunity with our waste streams as well to create products. How can we use these resources, our natural resources and our waste streams, to create value products here in Australia that we can send all around to the world? That's the opportunity, is really to drive this value creation here in Australia. That'll help us create the jobs that we need right now. We're going to need this economic recovery like never before. So research and industry working together, we can do good things.
That's wonderful. And thank you, Michael. And I think that's probably a really good place to end the discussion today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I'm sitting here, and there's a lot of questions that have come through on the poll that unfortunately we've not been able to get to, audience questions. So what we'll do is we'll try and follow up afterwards and get Vina and Michael and Dylan to help with some responses to some of those questions, because I know we've had a lot of interaction during today's discussion, which shows it's it's a very important topic. And I think it's been a fantastic discussion today, and I thank you all for your participation in it. So thank you very much.
That's good, Ryan. I think as we do more of these, we can come together, and perhaps in the new year we could look at doing an event at Vina's facility where people can come and look at the technology and the microfactories in action. That's always a good thing to see things working and be able to walk around and ask questions. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we can make an event of this.
Absolutely.
We'd love to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and really enjoyed the discussion as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And sorry, Dylan.
We might put up on the website the link to the government funding for researchers going into businesses. I think that's, a lot of people don't know about that, but we'll put that up, and I'm happy to answer questions about that afterwards.
Thanks, Dylan. That's much appreciated. And yeah, thank you all once again for your valued insights. And I'll just quickly run through a bit of a recap on our previous webinars, as this is sort of the fourth in this series that we've done. So to start off with, we looked at the experience of Australian manufacturers so far, how they've responded to the COVID crisis with a focus on supply chains, collaboration and resilience. We then looked at ways Australian manufacturers have used COVID as an opportunity to innovate. Following that, we assessed the costs and benefits involved with reshoring, onshoring and nearshoring, as well as finance and policy around global trade and exports. And as you're aware, today we looked at the important question of sustainability and complex issues such as waste management. So I hope everyone's found it a really useful series so far. Please do reach out to us if you have any questions about what we've discussed in this one or any of the other webinars. And as I said, we'll try and respond to the questions that we've had today. So we are going to take a little break from the webinars for a little while, but we do intend to continue on with the series in due course, and as well as collaborating with the AMGC on other content as well. So please do keep an eye out for future webinar invitations and other content in your inbox. Stay on our mailing list, and we'll keep you involved in these important discussions around what's happening in the industry and how we can rethink manufacturing. So finally, before we close today, there is a short feedback survey that will launch once we close the webinar, and we'd really appreciate it if you could quickly fill that in. For us, it's great for us to get some feedback and insight into how we can plan future sessions. But without further ado, it just remains for me to thank everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing these discussions such as these today in our future webinars. So many thanks to all, and goodbye.
Thank you.